Are we ready, Melissa? Okay. 2,000. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Cook County Public Health and Human Services Board to order on this Tuesday, August 15th at 8:30 a.m. We have our approval of the consent agenda, which includes our meeting agenda. I would like to, we have members of the audience here, and I would like to amend the agenda by including a public comment period. I think it looks like most are probably looking to speak in regards to the child care wage enhancement program, and just for the sake of everyone's time, we can give comment ahead of all of our discussions, and then people are free to go if they want. So I'd like to make that motion to include that into our agenda. Is there support?
Support.
Okay, thank you. We have Commissioner Sullivan with support. Any further discussion on that particular addition? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And are there any other items someone would like to remove to discuss from the consent agenda, or any other changes to? Yes, Commissioner Hawkins.
I would like to discuss E, please.
Okay. And maybe we'll put that, I guess, under items for board action. We'll add that as 5D. So moving E from the consent down to 5D. Anything else from anyone? Then I'd entertain a motion for the approval of the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda with the change and removal of item E.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We have a motion. Is there support?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner White. We have motion and support. Any further discussion there? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously there. Very good. Then, let's go on ahead with some public comment. Would anyone like to speak this morning? Give some comment, please. Come on up, and normally there's a sign-in sheet, name and, there we are. Name and address if possible. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Erin Petz-Jaguar. I'm a community member, and I teach high school Spanish at the local school here. Thanks for taking our comments and letting us go first. This is Aoife. She turns 1 tomorrow. Hi. And she goes to Cooperation Station here locally. So first of all, I'll keep this quite brief, but I wanted to thank you for the consideration of the Child Care Wage Enhancement Program. It supports staff retention through the many levels of our local economy. So not just beginning at the local immediate level of childcare itself, which is so critical to retain quality caregivers at that level. As we know, the retention of quality caregivers helps build secure attachment with our young children, which is really critical to raising healthy and happy children. And helping them set up for school-age success, which we see at the K-12 level. It's also super important for the rest of us in the economy, too, at the other levels, to have childcare available. We have many people locally. I can speak from Cooperation Station alone. We've provided care for staff at the local hospital, emergency room nurses, other emergency responder personnel, wildland firefighters, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. And so all of those services, as we know, are really critical to our local economy and difficult to retain staff, right? So if childcare goes away, likely the option for most of those parents is quitting their job. So again, I just wanted to thank you so much for the consideration of this program. Clearly, there are needs at the state and federal level to fund childcare, so all of that burden doesn't just fall on working families and providers, right? But right now, today, I think you have a solution in front of you that can at least bridge the gap temporarily. So I appreciate your consideration of that. The one other thing, just a personal anecdote, recently there was a childcare event. As you know, I saw many of you there. I was there for about the first 20 minutes. And then I had to leave because she had to go to the ER. She was fine, right? But I lost the chance at that moment to interface with our state legislators. So I just wanted to tell you that just brief story as an example of how difficult it is for our age demographic to even show up at these meetings to have our voices be heard, right? But we are here, we're doing the work, and we appreciate your consideration and support and understanding of how Aoife agrees with that. Of how critical this is through the whole web of our local economy. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Erin.
you.
Good morning, PHHS Board. My name's Neva Maxwell. I tried to send you my comments prepared last night, and they have been modified a little bit because, as it is with working parents, I got feedback from a board member at 10:30 last night, so I woke up at 5:20 this morning and made some updates. So it's not all repetitive. Good morning, PHHS Board. My name's Neva Maxwell, and I'm here as a working professional, mom of a spunky 2-year-old, and a current board chair of Cooperation Station Childcare. I want to express my strong support of the proposed continuation of the Child Care Wage Enhancement Program through 2024, as well as voice the need for this issue to have additional local long-term support. Over the last few years, our local child care programs have undergone enormous stress. These are jobs that require highly skilled, certified, and licensed, compassionate staff who need to be paid equitably for their services. Several programs have had to close due to staffing turnover or no staff at all. Staff burnout from high physical, emotional, and mental stress loads and low wages are the primary causes. To pay the wages required necessitates public funding. Federal leaders have yet to provide relief. Our state's Department of Human Services recently announced the Great Start Compensation Program, which will provide some base funding for staff to replace the sunsetted COVID stabilization grants. However, this isn't enough, and at the local level, you can make a difference. For those of you that don't know, full-time child care in Cook County costs over $11,000 annually. It's staggering. Due to this structural labor supply issues and housing cost, this amount is well above the national average for a county of our population size. The Department of Labor indicates that a county of our population, about 56,000, the home and center-based infant and toddler child care programs range from $5,000 to $7,000 annually. When we parents say the availability of affordable child care is non-existent in Cook County, we're not over-exaggerating. When it comes to family planning in Cook County, several families have only one child because it's I'm sorry. It's simply infeasible to have a second child. I apologize, just 1 second.
Take your time, Neva.
The American dream of having 2 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence, or at least a running toilet, feels outreach for many. Cooperation Station is a 4-star parent-aware rated program. I didn't think that was going to be that emotionally loaded. I really apologize.
No problem.
Which this 4-star parent-aware rated program, which means that families that qualify are eligible for subsidized child care funding through early learning scholarships and CCAP. However, maintaining that 4-star rating involves rigorous efforts to have high-quality curriculum and staff training. This necessitates paying our staff competitive salaries. Essentially, well-paid staff equal good quality programs, which equals funding eligibility for low-income families to afford childcare. If we lose high-quality staff, we lose our ability to participate in these programs to help families that need it. Without these funding sources, families may have to leave the workforce and may not be able to afford living on one salary, and single parents may not be able to work at all. Affordable childcare is an essential service for many to allow us to live and work in Cook County. It also should be noted that many parents with young children serve emergency services roles. Currently, 2 of the Cooperation Station parents are carded wildland firefighters, and without childcare, their readiness could be compromised. Previous parents have been nurses and other EMS staff. We need 2 things to support this piece of community infrastructure: more support for staff and financial assistance for families. This program offers significant relief for both private and nonprofit childcare providers until a more long-term solution can be found. I want to emphasize that point because some funding sources only benefit nonprofit childcare centers right now. Before you is a bridge to allow time to find better solutions. Using a fund balance for a 1-year program may cause hesitation. However, it is buying time to find a better long-term solution. This community has used taxes to fund other community infrastructure projects before, and perhaps this is a community need that could receive the same support. If you wonder why other parents, or why you're not getting a flood of emails and phone calls from parents wanting you to support this, let me tell you, we're busy making ends meet. We're in the messy middle of life, caring for aging parents, caring for developing children, building our careers, and contributing to our community. I never realized how few hours there were in a day until I became a mom. Not to mention, the people this affects most, the child care providers, are busy providing care to our children right now, so they just can't be here. I'm in a place of high privilege to be able to take off time and come here today. Why this discussion matters. I ask that you take a moment to learn more and absorb the importance of the first 5 years of a child's life. There are a tremendous number of resources online with this information. Essentially, investing in the first 5 years of a child's life can entirely change the course and the rest of their lives, having ripple effects for years to come in high school and adulthood. Please imagine, what would our community look like if we gave a priority to providing all the young children in Cook County the best start possible, to truly invest in the future equitably for each child? You water a tree at its roots, not the branches and not the trunk. Let's publicly support our children's lives at their beginnings, not 5 years into it. I'll leave you with this from the First 5 Years Funds, which I feel puts it best. Children are born learning, and what they learn in those first few years can change the course of their lives. The overwhelming evidence and research demonstrate that high-quality early care and education is a crucial component of a child's healthy development. Investing in childcare and early learning is a solution that creates upward mobility by ensuring all children have the opportunity to build foundations for success in school and life, while also allowing parents to work or attend school or pursue greater economic security. Thank you very much for your time and attention to this matter. I do just want to add really, really quickly that last February, my husband and I were up here living and working. We had about a 6-month-old at that time. And I just broke down. I was trying to make everything work, and we didn't have childcare. We couldn't find it for an infant, because not all childcare places offer infant care. It was the lowest point of my entire life. And that kind of emotional stress, it affects your bond with your child. You know, it affects your relationship with your partner. It affects your productivity at work. My husband had to exit the workforce and take care of our son. And eventually we found somebody who was able to take care of our son, but we kind of grasped at the first straw possible. We didn't know if this person was really qualified to take care of our child. We were so desperate. I was thinking, we're really just hoping that this is going to work out. So I just want you to realize the desperation that there is to this issue. And I really appreciate your time. Sorry I lost it unexpectedly. It happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neva.
Is there anyone else who would like to give public comment at this time? Doesn't look like it, so we can move on to the rest of our agenda. Thank you again for the comments this morning. Brings us down to the staff report. We have our new fiscal supervisor, Plamen, and Alison McIntyre, our director.
So we'll need 2 report this month. I'll just start by giving some immense gratitude to Plamen. Dimitrov, in the first month on the job, is doing some phenomenal work already in helping update and prepare our budget presentation for you all and for the public. Just a reminder, this is our preliminary budget, the first look at our budget. We do expect to get additional revenue, grant allocation information from the state as we move towards year end. But this is our best guess at where we see our department in 2024. And then Melissa, I see that we've got the presentation mode on the screen. So if you go to display settings, you should have the option right up top on the top bar. To swap presenter view, and that should bring up the full screen slide.
It's not reflecting what it's on. Oh, there we go.
All right, so if you want to advance to the next slide. So I'll start with our department mission statement, which was developed by staff several years ago. Our mission for our Integrated Public Health and Human Services Department is supporting the health, safety, and well-being of Cook County. Our budget represents our work to achieve this mission in 2024, as well as our state and federal mandates.
Good morning, PHHS board members, Director McIntyre. Thanks for a kind introduction, but while I do want to take all the credit, I should say that the previous supervisor, Lori Erickson, has done a lot of work on the budget too, and she deserves a lot of the credit for this too. As you all know, Lori was well organized and left the department with a good budget template, so I had to just finish the work that she has started. So kudos to Lori Erickson. If she's listening, thank you, Lori. So the PHHS, the Public Health and Human Services 2024 budget has a net county cost of $2,464,541. That's a 13.97% increase from the approved 2023 levy, following a 3-year trend of decreasing levy requests. This next slide here compares the approved 2023 budget, the total expenditures, the total revenue, the net county cost, shows the planned use of fund balance and the approved or the requested levy. Our proposed budget costs are 7.08% higher than the last year's budget, but with increased collections and reducing taxpayer burden with a planned use of excess reserve for over budget placement expenses, our 2024 levy request is budgeted at 3.97% more than the approved levy for 2023. Please note that there is no planned use of fund balance in the budget for year 2024 to offset the increase in wages. As you can see, in 2023, $203,974 were budgeted to reduce the impact of the wage increase due to the wage study. Furthermore, in the 2024 budget does not include any ARPA funds, whereas in 2023, $80,000 were budgeted under the social services personnel cost and $75,000 under public health personnel cost. Utilizing ARPA funds, in a similar amount as in year 2023, or about $155,000, would reduce the requested levy to $2,309,541, which will represent a 7% increase of the requested levy from year 2023. At this time, it is our recommendation not to utilize the fund balance to supplement the wage increases. We'll talk about more on the fund balance on slide number 9.
I think we say this every year, but we are not a department that has a large visible impact in terms of the trucks on the streets or the improvements to your roads. We are people providing services. As such, this is our largest expense as a department. We have here on slide 5 our 2024 organizational chart representing our different divisions within Public Health and Human Services. On the far left in blue, the Adult and Home and Community-Based Services team supports the elderly, developmentally disabled, and vulnerable populations. The Behavioral Health team provides children's and adult mental health case management, rehabilitative services, substance use disorder services, and crisis response. In red is our Public Health Department, who partner with several local agencies to keep us all safe, informed, and healthy, and achieve the goals of our 5-year community health assessment and health improvement plan. The fourth column in green is the Economic Assistance Division, providing eligibility determination for financial food support programs funded by state and federal agencies, as well as access and eligibility for Minnesota healthcare programs. At the top, myself, along with our administrative team on the far right, which support all areas of our department, including leadership, office support, fiscal compliance, and reporting. I'll just add here, too, that we are proposing no new FTE changes for 2024, so this should look familiar.
Since we are people providing services, payroll always has the biggest impact on the budget. The 2024 personnel costs include a 3.5% approved COLA increase and a projected 10% increase in the health insurance. We also have 5 staff with more than 10 years of service with the county who earn longevity pay. 2 of these staff have been here more than 15 years. Training and travel costs are higher than the previous years, and particularly when compared to 21 and 22, due to in-person meeting resuming and the adoption of the GSA reimbursement rates. In the last several years, we have received COVID-related grants in public health and allocated ARPA funds to emergency response and recovery staff, and services in public health and behavioral health that are expanded. State and federal aid has not been, the allocations for 2024 have not been finalized. And so in some line items, we've used a prior year averages as a placeholder. Our budget does not include revenue from the general fund, from the local assistance and tribal consistency fund. Back one slide here. We are proposing a plan use a fund balance up to $200,000 for placements that exceed the budget. Each year we thoughtfully budget for potential out-of-home placements, and while we are prudent with our budget, we cannot precisely forecast the needs of the community next year, nor how many children or adults may need temporary placement. Therefore, in 2024 budget, will again reflect a 2-step approach to addressing these potential expenditures. Reduce budgeted amount for our home placements cost and contingency for using up to $200,000 of fund balance if needed in social services for children's out-of-home placement, children's mental health services, and adult mental health placements. Next slide is gonna show the levy request trends here. And as we can see in 2024, we are, the levy change is 14% nearly, 13.97. I want to take your attention to years 2020 and 2021. And I'll just do a few explanations here. The loss of contracted mental health agency in the county in 2018 prompted the department to hire additional behavioral health staff to fill up gaps in several needed services. And as the personnel costs have risen each year, our levy request for 2024 has increased as well. Through many early intervention programs in social services, we have been able to identify needs and provide support, which has reduced our home placements in the county. Additionally, our social workers draw revenue from Department of Human Services through their targeted case management work. Having the right level of staffing in the social services and the fiscal services increases additional funding to the department and reduces our reliances on levy funds. Reduced placements and increased COVID-related revenue resulted in levy decreases in each year since 2020. The preliminary 2024 budget marks our first levy increase in several years. However, if you look on this slide, the 2024 levy request is very comparable to 2020 and 2021. The fund balance, the budgeted PHHS, Public Health and Human Services fund balance at the end of year 2023 is $3,568,913. This is equal to approximately 66% of our 2024 budgeted expenditures. The Office of State Auditor recommends that we hold reserves between 30 and 50%, and the county fiscal policy requires Public Health and Human Services to have fund balance of at least 40% of the expenditures for a calendar year. And in 2024, we are proposing the use of $200,000 for our home and commitment placements. And that is only if the actual expenses exceed the budgeted amount. And $366,645 for the child care subsidies. If we add the reserves that are required, our projected fund balance at the end of 2024 will be $3,02,268.
So as Plamen mentioned earlier, there are some unknowns, and some projections as it relates to our 2024 revenue. We are diligent about looking for outside funding sources to support our work. We've applied for some competitive grants, expect some competitive grant request for proposals to open leading up to the point at which the final levy is set at the end of the year. And until these awards are decided, we are not representing them in our budget. In 2024, we will continue to utilize the HRSA grant, that's the Rural Communities Opioid Response Program grant, in which we're partnering with the University of Minnesota, Sawtooth Mountain Clinic, and Grand Portage to increase our work in substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery. This is a 3-year award, and we are one of the sub-grantees in which half full-time equivalent prevention coordinator is funded within our public health team. This is new to our budget in 2024, as we did not complete the subcontracting process at the point that our budget was initially presented. Additional revenue opportunities for 2024 include dedicated funding from the Regional Arrowhead Behavioral Health Alliance towards our coordinated crisis response pilot. Previously, we relied on a county allocation of ARPA funds to support that pilot, and we do have $140,000 allocated in 2024 towards ongoing support of that program, with the goal to apply for direct allocation with the next 2-year grant cycle. Other public health grant opportunities include cannabis education grant, transformation grants, the Age-Friendly Communities Grant, which is included in our budget, as well as an increased public health emergency preparedness allocation. Within your agenda materials, I included a table from the State Department of Health with some additional information on the statewide allocation, timeline, and the steps that will be needed before we receive our county allocation. for each of those new funding sources or increased allocations. We also intend to apply for the next round of healthy housing grants to continue our work in that area. However, the RFP has not been released yet. And again, we will not include those in our budget until the allocations and contracts are finalized. Moving on to our childcare wage provider pilot. At the directive of this board in 2022, our team put together funding scenarios that included local solutions to address our childcare crisis. In 2022, the board authorized a planned use of fund balance up to $252,907 to pilot a child care wage subsidy program. The impact of that pilot 6 months in, as you all heard at the July Committee of the Whole meeting, was 45 additional children being served locally in Cook County and Grand Portage. As we heard this morning, this is not just an impact to the families and to the providers. There are workforce and economic development impacts as well of having this many additional families receiving care. Our 2024 budget includes a planned use of up to $366,645 of department fund balance to continue and expand support to the local child care system, families, and economic health of our community. As this is a planned use of department reserves, there is no impact to the taxpayer levy associated with this program. We can flip back to slide 9 for that fund balance analysis to show how even with the planned use of up to that amount, we are still well within the recommended reserves according to Cook County budget policy and the Office of the State Auditor. We can go back to slide 12. This financial model was included in the board packet, but wanted to represent it in the presentation as well, so you can see how we are coming up with that estimate of $366,665. This is estimating wage enhancement hours for each of our licensed providers, the 6 licensed providers in Cook County and Grand Portage, as well as with the presumed addition of 2 new providers, one in town and one in the West End. Another change related to our projections for 2024 is that we are proposing to compensate child care providers for the actual hours worked rather than capping that at 40 hours a week as we've done in 2023. The goal of this being to especially uplift our sole providers who are often working more than 40 hours a week to provide care for children and run their businesses. In addition, we are also proposing a 3% cost of living increase be applied to that wage increase for the providers. You might ask, how does this interact with the new DHS stabilization grants that were just authorized in the most recent legislative session? If you want to advance to the next slide. Again, I've pulled this directly from the presentation that Nancy put together in July to illustrate the range of monthly payments that providers were eligible to apply for and receive through the COVID stabilization grants. These were in addition to wage enhancement dollars administered by the county. These were in place beginning in 2021, but what's illustrated here is the range from January 2022 until June of this year when the program was ultimately sunsetted. This program will be replaced by the Great Start transition grants until the parameters of the Great Start compensation program can be fully developed and finalized. Current estimates is that providers will be eligible to apply for and receive approximately $263 per FTE per month at an average of $1.64 an hour through the Great Start transition grants. Our recommended funding for 2024 is on top of these assumptions about the Great Start transition grants. If we were to reduce the wage enhancement allocations by what providers would be eligible to receive through the transition grants, it would result in a reduction from what they are eligible to receive in 2023, as the current wage enhancement program is on top of those COVID stabilization grants. Again, if these were factored in, it would be an overall reduction in support to childcare providers. Also, in our 2024 budget proposal are our funding recommendations for the Public Health Fund. In 2018, the County Board delegated authority to the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Council and the Public Health Fund Review Subcommittee to review applications and make recommendations to grant funds to nonprofits whose work aligns with our mission and our community health assessment and health improvement plan. The Health Improvement Plan identifies goals to ensure that local resources are targeted towards the greatest needs in our community. And the Public Health Fund program allows us to partner with local providers to meet gaps in community services. This year, we received applications totaling $227,839. Our budget includes supporting $150,000 in recommended funding by the Grant Review Subcommittee of the PHHS Advisory Council. This is a 21.47% decrease over the 2023 grant awards. We've also, the Review Subcommittee also prepared 2 scenarios. One that reflects an increase to the recommended amount to be granted out if the wage enhancement program for childcare does not continue, as we had 2 nonprofit childcare providers apply for financial support that would be eligible under the wage enhancement pilot. So again, if the wage enhancement does not continue, the support for local wage enhancement does not continue into 2024, the amount that we would propose to grant out is a total of $185,500. And the difference between what we have budgeted would, again, be a planned use of fund balance on top of that $150,000. I'll throw it back to Plamen for the final summary, and then we're happy to take questions, as I'm sure you have many.
Again, this is another look at our budget for 2024 when compared to year 2023. The total expenditures, total revenue, net county costs, plan use of fund balance, and that approved to the requested levy.
Oh, there's one more slide though, right?
There's one more slide.
I'm just teasing.
It's not
but,
that
yeah.
exciting.
Very good, thank you. I'm sure we'll be going through this again as we're discussing. Who would like to start off the discussion? What questions do we have? What thoughts do we have? Pat, please.
Thank you. I would like to speak for the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee that I'm chair of. I'd like you to know that Alison and her team has done a great job in informing us as an advisory council as to what this budget entails. I would also like you to know that we encouraged Alison that she might want to add to this budget because we think it's very austere, and it is very, and it could, and additional funds could certainly benefit the people in this county. However, this organization, Public Health and Human Services, is very, very aware of the need to keep expenses at the lowest possible level to make sure that our levy is not an obnoxious number to our taxpayers. So I want to commend this group on how hard they worked on this budget to make sure that they are meeting the very most need for this county. And the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee truly believes that this budget is fair and wants to make sure that everyone understands that we support it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. When I met with Alison to talk about the budget, I had similar questions just about if it's enough because of the high demand for those grants. But I think knowing our constraints, it's probably the best bang for the buck, in my opinion, best bang for the buck to go the childcare route instead of maybe investing more right now in the grants. We can't do it all right now, but
Exactly.
But just how can we have the biggest impact? Any other questions or comments, please, Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah.
Thank you. Really excited to know that you followed Lori's template. You know, people change, things change. I've been following this budget since 2015. So you made it very easy for me to put it into my personal spreadsheet to track how are things going here. So just kudos to Lori, kudos to you for recognizing that she's got a good layout. I did notice you added a couple items, and I just want to clarify a couple things. So under economic assistance, healthcare access was moved from reimbursable to county services, MTM contract. What does that mean?
I think there has been a talk for over a year at least that I am aware to transition the healthcare services from being administered in the county and seeking reimbursement from the state for the services we provide to clients to a company that the name is MTM. I'm not sure what the abbreviation exactly means. That will result in a contract with MTM, and therefore they'll be seeking reimbursement for the work they're doing for providing services to clients. That's why it's reflected as reduced expense on the expense side
Yeah.
and the reduced revenue on the revenue side.
But I thought we were working as an organization to try to increase our insurance reimbursables.
I can clarify that this would be limited to the healthcare access services that are administered by our staff, in which enrollees and medical assistants can receive mileage reimbursement and lodging assistance for medical appointments. So currently we have one staff person that administers that program within our team, and what we are exploring is joining a regional contract in which a third-party provider is providing that service. The presumption is that that could increase the pool of volunteer drivers and create efficiencies in how medical assistants enrollees are accessing that program, but we're still testing those assumptions. We haven't entered into a contract agreement yet, but have that represented in our budget in the event that we do enter that regional contract for this organization to administer our healthcare access program.
Okay. Sorry, that was something else. So you mentioned, I get it. Things were grants and timeframes. You've got to guess at what your revenues or expenses may be in relation to that. And COVID, over the years, you can, if you follow the line items and see, that really impacted a lot of things. So it makes it hard to set a budget. But you mentioned that when you don't know, you use prior year averages. How many years are you using in your averages?
Typically the last two.
Last 2 years? Okay.
That only applies to some line items. I want to make that clear, not all. To the ones we don't know the location that are from DHS at this time, the Department of Human Services.
So when you track some line items, and that's what I appreciated, the decreases over the years since 20 onward, because we had budgeted revenues extremely high, low, and expenses extremely high in some areas. And if you go back, sometimes we were off 50, 60%. It's really important to look at both the revenues and the expenses, not just the bottom line net, to see how good are we at budgeting. So I'm just wondering, for you personally, advising this board on numbers, what percentage variance do you think is more of a yellow flag, red flag? Do you have a set amount that you think is?
On which spot exactly?
On various line items, if you notice there's a,
So the line items that we know at this time what they're gonna cost, and those are the payroll amounts. Because we have an approved wage scale for 2024. So that if I'm off by more than several percent here, I'll say, well, not good, okay? But I can't predict how many out-of-home placements we're gonna have and how many commitments we're gonna have.
Right.
This is where you see the largest numbers away from the budgeted numbers, because we don't know. So here is where I'll have to answer by saying, we have a placeholder there because we don't know, and that's where sometimes you see the numbers really being different from the actual numbers being different from the budgeted numbers, and that's where we propose the use of fund balance in case we need to supplement some of those expenses.
Yeah, and I totally get that. I don't disagree with the use of fund balance when we have such a large amount. But I'm going back to where you have your 21 and your 22 actual. It's really important to go back and say, okay, where were we off? Why were we off? What caused that fund balance increase? And let's make sure not continuing that same mentality of thinking of budgeting for 23 and 24. It can be warranted that there's times, yes, that makes sense. We still have to have that. But if you have 5 years of experience of, wait, for 5 years, we've been collecting too much in taxes because we think it's going to be X, but it's really only Y, or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's where how far back you go to say, maybe we need to relook at that line item. And it's not across the board. I get it. There's just some.
Well, and I think, just to reiterate what Plamen said, it's the biggest variances are in the out-of-house placements and
Not necessarily, no, that's not true.
those aren't the biggest variances?
No.
Oh, where would it'd be helpful to know other large variances so we can talk more specifically.
I have to go back to, okay. Other services and charges as a program expense is 75% off. I have to go down to my chart here.
Can you point us where that is?
It's on my spreadsheet. I don't know where it is on your spreadsheet here on your table.
Well, if we can talk about the budget, proposed budget in front of us, it would be helpful.
Yeah.
And you might see 75% difference but those amounts, sometimes we're talking about a small dollar amount.
Right.
Where you're from 1,000 to 1,500, well, that will give you a 50% increase. So, I mean,
And I would like to just add here that going back 5 years does not necessarily tell us what the next 2 years is going to be like, because we have had
Exactly.
increased inflation. We have had a lot of people in this county who needs additional services based on the fact that they have been in fact impacted by COVID and/or many other things. So we need to plan for the future and know that based on what's going on in the world right now, there's going to be increases. It's not going to decrease. Not in the next 2 years, based on what's going on with our local economies. So although I appreciate what you're trying to do, I think from what I just heard in talking about percentages, it's really important for me to know what that dollar number is. Because 75% sounds big, but if it's $500, I don't care. If it's $2,000, sometimes I might not care either, depending upon what the item is, based on what's going on with our local economy and with our local population. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I just need more detail in order to say, this makes sense to be discussing with a board who's trying to plan for the future, not the past.
I agree. It's hard to do accurate budgeting because you can't predict the future.
Right.
But you can look at the past. How much did we add to fund balance in 2022?
I will have to look at the number, but we did supplement the fund balance in 2022. There's a lot of numbers right now in my
Yes.
in my head, and it's hard to just jump to one number.
And how are we
present.
doing for 2023?
We have some challenges. We have some out-of-home placements that were not anticipated. Other than that, our revenues are about where we want to be, maybe slightly under with 45% through July. So,
Okay, I just want to point out that we have added substantially to budget fund balance in this area for quite a few years in a row. Not a bad thing. I am a saver. I appreciate that. But there's a point where you say, oh, do we really need to take that much? So I question, this is preliminary budget. I get it. I appreciate the work. I know it's not easy. I appreciate the work, but my encouragement would be to refine this. I think there's areas where maybe you want to take a second look and say, you know what, we really don't need to, we can adjust this number and reduce instead of 14% levy increase.
Well, so we have, in this proposed budget, planned use of fund balance, that's pretty significant. What areas would you like us to look at more? To, as you say, not add to the fund balance? Like, where do you think the budgeting is off?
I just think some of the expenses we are anticipating, we have been anticipating expenses as too high, and maybe it's time, since we didn't need all that, we haven't needed it for 5 years in a row now. Just
Which
double
expense,
check.
though? That's what I'm trying to get, it'd be productive if we could like really identify some items to look at.
I would just go down the whole thing then.
Nope.
I mean,
Well,
if you,
that's why we're here today.
expenses right here. When it says expenses for economic assistance at $291,853, go through and look at what those line items are.
And this is what staff does, and they
Right.
come with their recommendation, but you're saying that you recommend lowering those expenses.
Double checking that really what we budget is in line with what the actual is.
I think I'm confused here, and I need some help. This group does a great job in figuring out what the needs are in our county. You can't anticipate that reducing any line item right now is a good thing. If we do, based on what you're looking for, Stacy, and then next year, we have a lot of out-of-home placements, or we have some other kind of issue happen, there's not going to be money to help the citizens in this county. So I understand your concern, but I think I'd like to speak for the staff and say, they look at these things. This budget wasn't just presented in a vacuum. They go through every single line item. And to be fair to them, I think really figuring out what is it that you're most concerned about so we can look at it makes some sense. But I don't know what I'm missing here.
Well, I'm struggling just because I would like to identify an item, a line item that in particular you think could be adjusted. And we can go through line by line and do.
I don't think that's appropriate for here. This is preliminary. I'm just expressing my reservations with a 14% levy increase in this budget, the way it's presented. And I would encourage more analyzation of each department and make sure we are confident that we really need to budget expenses way over than what has traditionally been spent in that department.
Okay.
I just have a responsibility of taxpayers, to
Well,
make sure that
makes
we
one of
are,
us, huh?
that we are really not over budgeting our expenses and under budgeting our revenues. That's all.
Sure, yeah. No, that's why we're here. That is our charge. And I have a lot of faith and confidence in our staff and going through the budget. I didn't see things that were red flags for me. Again, I think our biggest costs are the biggest things we should keep in mind are the out-of-home placements, and clearly the wage study that and wage adjustments had a big impact last year, but then also the childcare subsidy, and these are things that we're taking potentially out of the reserves. And so if we are indeed adding to those reserves, it's not like the money is getting thrown away. It's not like the money's gone forever. It's that we're just trying to manage, we're trying to juggle our community needs with the monies going in and out and covering our bases in case there are higher numbers of out-of-home placements, and then we can handle it. For many years before I got here, it was quite a struggle getting that fund balance back up, and so I do have a lot of reservations taking away from it. But again, I do strongly believe that our return on investment, our best bang for the buck, is going to be providing these subsidies to try to really build our community base with economic issues, as well as emergency services and just education, everything. It's all tied back to housing. It's all tied back to childcare, and that's kind of the root of it. But if we could, it's easy to say, go look at it again. But it's harder to say, I have a question about why this line item has a variance, and that's where I think we can have a more productive conversation rather than just say, do it again, That's not very productive or helpful. It's what a lot of people want to hear, but it's not doing anything.
I'd
So-
like to also point out that even with the use of the subsidies in the fund balance, at the end of the day, they're still within county guidelines as to how much that fund balance should
Yes,
be.
thank you.
And I think that's really important for everyone to understand that's even listening to this meeting.
You're right,
They're
yeah.
not moving that fund balance underneath what the county asks us to do. And in the old days, when all of a sudden fund balances got to zero and we had to do a lot of different adjustments, that happened. This group took very clear care to make sure their number stays there. So I just want to point that out as well, because I thought that was a very important thing to see.
I appreciate that. I should get more comfortable using fund balance when we have surpluses. I really should. It's just, my fear and conservative nature, I guess. I'm getting back to that.
I understand why we want to be conservative, and I understand why we want to really support our needs with the money that is needed. But this group has shown year over year that they budget as close to bottom line as they can, and when they use the fund balance to help the citizens. It's not to do anything extraneous. I'm sorry, James, I stepped on you.
Oh, no,
Go ahead.
I misspoke too. I probably shouldn't say conservative as much as protective. That's maybe more. But please, Administrator,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to know, we are going to be talking more about the use of fund balance across all three major funds in our working session after this meeting. And I want everybody to know that Brady and I have been having a lot of conversations about the use of fund balance in this budget and the other two funds. We are very mindful of the targets that have been established for fund balance in each fund. 75% in the general fund, 60 in this fund, and then 40, no, I'm sorry,
Ours
60.
is 40.
Ours is 40, and then, highway is 60. In any case, we do have healthy fund balances across the three funds, but the other thing to note is that it's very difficult. You can't just push a button and know at any given minute what the fund balance is. It's a hard number to zero in on. But we do have an approximate idea of where we are in relation to the overall goals. And I think it's important for the public to know that.
thank you. Rana, did you have?
Well, I would just say the staff, I'm sure, has spent a lot of time on this, and they're getting paid for their time, and asking people to redo what they've already done in good conscience, with good skills, seems maybe not as efficient a use of money as it might be to find an extra $50 someplace. Just my thought.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Hawkins' concern is greater than $50, but that's where I was that's where I was like, I thought it would be more helpful if we could identify the lines or the areas specifically, rather than just doing
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
over again. But, because there is significant growth in the fund balance. That's a fact, and so it is good to try to find that balance. I just, don't want to offset the balance, because we've had a pretty solid thing going with our budget since the hard times, we'll say. Commissioner White?
How much time is spent by how many people to get the budget in place?
That is really hard to estimate, but I can tell you that it involves meetings with each of our unit supervisors. Within the last few years, we have instituted a practice of using actual amounts for travel and training. In the past, we would budget a blanket amount, maybe apply a % increase to it. In the last several years, our fiscal supervisor has met with each supervisor to look at what current and projected staff needs are, what conferences they'll be attending, what are the mandated trainings that they expect in onboarding new staff. So I can tell you, as it relates to our training and travel, that's a much more involved process than it has been in the past, where we're looking at actual hotel expenses, actual mileage, actual conference expenses. Similar with out-of-home placement, meeting with staff to know who is in placement and is still expected to be in placement into the next budget year, budgeting for a few unknowns across different service types. We begin in the spring, I want to say, talking about the budget. So we start early on in the year to do some preliminary planning. What are the changes to programs and staffing that we're expecting for the next year, if any? And we continue the work into the fall and winter as we continue to refine and hone the budget as we get additional state and federal revenue and grant information.
I was just going to say, I think you misspoke. You said you start in the spring, but it doesn't ever end, really.
Really? Yeah, this is very true. Thank you, Commissioner. And what I can offer as a, perhaps a response to Commissioner Hawkins' request is that at our next board meeting, we bring additional data on historical out-of-home placement spending trends to look back even 5-10 years at where we were at previously in some of our highest expense years, just to illustrate, where we've come and how much of that is really the reduction in spending overall in out-of-home placement is a result of having adequate staff in children and family services.
I just, thank you, but you don't need to do that for me. I have that information, and I can see that, and I totally agree with you. You can see the line, if you follow it through the years, you can see the benefits and what has happened. What I'm saying is different, I guess. Travel, supplies. If you typically budget $5,000 to $10,000, but you only spend $1,000, that's where I'm saying. Okay, there could be a very good reason. This year there's a conference in Hawaii we're going to, I don't know. Could be a very good reason for keeping it there. What I'm saying is, when you have it on your budget and various line items that are consistently over the years, maybe not quite as accurate as they could be. That's where I'm asking. Just, are you sure you want it there? Is that necessary? Could be, could not, maybe not. Out-of-home placements, no, that's not my concern. I think you're doing a good job budgeting for that.
That is helpful to know that it's travel and supplies as an example.
As an example.
As an example.
There's more, but do you want to really go through the long list of what he looks at? Because it is pretty, it's very detailed, and I appreciate the work you do on this. It's not an easy job, I know that. So I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. But yeah, as an example, that it is helpful, and it does, I guess, help frame the discussion in my mind again. And it's kind of going what Pat was saying, in that, if there was 10,000 budgeted for travel and COVID hit and you didn't spend any of it, right?
Right.
Do we need the travel? Well, not for COVID, but now that we're doing in-person again, it's probably a pretty good idea to do that. But what you're saying is even before COVID, there was items that you thought were higher. The other kind of catch there is that we don't want to under budget, right?
Right.
So it's good to be accurate, but if it's inaccurate, my preference to be slightly over budget, because then it can be returned and then we don't have to spend that in the next year, right? But when we're talking about impacts, when we're talking about out-of-home placements, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars versus, $5,000. It all adds up for sure. But in our roles, I think we need to be taking that big impact look, right? I mean, it's important to have the accuracy and to get the dollars and cents lined up, but our role as leaders is to really do the big stuff, like how does this overall look? And I mean, I don't know that we as commissioners should be nickel and diming.
I agree with you, but the fact that we've added $1 million to fund balance in a year, to me, that's not nickel and diming. And it's not all explained because of out-of-home placements. There's another reason. So let's document what that reason is. It's $1 million of taxpayer dollars.
Well, do we have a broad stroke reason for that beyond out-of-home placements for an additional $1 million?
I would say one of the other primary drivers in our add to fund balance in recent years has been an influx of new revenue from the state, COVID-related grants, federal grants that we did not anticipate and really offset the cost of our staffing and service delivery and programming over the last several years. So the new revenue combined with significant reductions in out-of-home placement spending, even though in the last year and in the next year, we're proposing this two-step approach of reducing our budget and having the planned contingency use of fund balance. If we exceed the budget, we still have added to fund balance. Those are the primary drivers.
Yeah, it makes sense, COVID grants.
Plamen.
Please.
Another reason to why we added to the fund balance is because we improved our billing practices too for services we provide to for clients. And similarly, we had an estate recovery program that was not up to par. I would describe it as that. And so between the increased funding from the state and federal funds and our improved billing practices for services we provide, I think these are some of the largest factors that it contributed to the, and of course reduced expenses, but these are the reasons to why our fund balance was increasing over the last 5 years.
And Pat, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think we're getting to that point. There's been some more detail added that doesn't,
Okay.
that added helped me.
Okay. Please, Commissioner White.
You were talking about out-of-home placements. In the future, when we get to have you do a presentation on those things, it's like I sort of get it, but I get this much, and I'm sure there's like this much, what goes into this, how much, not time necessarily, but what's the process of coming to that decision, and then how many, the whys of out-of-home placement, and then providers in county, out of county, just some sort of general history. I mean, I know this happens, but I have a sense of why it would happen, but it's like you just don't send somebody somewhere and you've got 3 months to get it put together and then you're coming back. I mean, there's just so much I don't know about the entire process, how this works. And I'm absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, our children and families are more important than anything else in this community across the board. So we need to do this. We need to do it right.
And it's largely driven by the state justice system. I've attended some trainings to learn about it, and with the Children's Justice Initiative, and It's very regulated. Our goal as an organization is to always keep families together as much as possible. It's always the ultimate last resort to separate, and that's a very difficult decision. There is a very strict timeline with that as well. And it's very challenging to meet the timeline, both with just the timing of cases in court, as well as coordinating all parties involved, reaching family of the individuals involved to try to find some solutions and to work through all that. But we probably could have a representative from the Children's Justice do a presentation for the board. I think that would go over pretty well, just to learn more about it.
Or even Alison, she works it. She's here.
Yeah.
She knows, I mean, she knows the ins and outs and how it impacts our staff, our community. She's here. She knows how it impacts our community, and I'm sure she understands what the rules and regulations are,
Sure.
without a doubt.
Yeah, she, Alison is a rock star and can certainly do that. I'm just saying that the people who, the state justice system, I think, is kind of where the burden, what needs to be followed.
Right, and so they would then know how many people we send out of here, how much effort has been put in. They would know our situation in our community, so I could ask that person that comes from somewhere else about how it impacts our community directly.
Yeah, they have all the numbers for Cook County, Lake County, Carleton County, and St. Louis County, and we got a lot of accolades in Cook County for our out-of-home placements, and it was actually really interesting because Judge Kuzo had to sign a release of information because it's
Confidential.
very confidential, very sensitive, and it got a little awkward because the presenters from the state were kind of going through county by county and saying, all right, you guys did good here, but you have this timeline that you didn't make, and this and that, and again, Cook County did really well on that, but then some of the other counties were getting kind of beat up, and Judge Kuzo stopped them and said, look, this is not what I thought this information was going to be used for. I do not approve of this, and I don't think it should be being done, and it just shut down the whole thing right then. But they do have a very good grip, and just the whole timelines. Probably Attorney Hicken would also have a good perspective because she's been involved with that too. But yeah, please.
Suggestion to offer, we do have the rest of our months booked out through the year in terms of our monthly board presentation, but perhaps we could shift things around to have a multidisciplinary team present on the out-of-home placement process from
Sure.
start to finish, what it looks like from the point that we first receive a report of alleged maltreatment to the point that a youth is entering out-of-home placement either in or outside the county, and all of the work that goes on within our department to ensure that that child is receiving health care services, that we're accessing all available revenues to offset the cost to the county, and the work that our family services is doing to support the family throughout the process. I think that could be a really rich presentation and a great use of our few remaining months with Grace Bouchard to have her explain that process, as she has been deeply involved over a number of years.
Yeah, well, I'll leave that to you, where to prioritize that presentation with the others, but it sounds like it'd be
Exactly what I
valued.
would like to hear.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Other questions, comments, thoughts, directions?
I'd like to
Please.
switch the conversation a little bit. A lot of the people in this room and that are on the Zoom are very interested in the board's feeling about the child care subsidy program. So I'd love to just assume that we haven't had any questions or comments yet, that everybody's in favor of it. But I think if there is anything that needs to be brought up before we go into the next round of looking at the budget, it would be good to hear some thoughts now. Perhaps there's not, but I just don't want to overlook it.
Thank you, yes. Good point. Commissioner Sullivan, was there something you wanted to say before
I was
that?
going to actually talk about that.
Okay.
And that
Thank you.
I feel really compelled, based on all the information that we've received, the providers we've had contact with, and from the families that have been impacted, that this is a really important program to continue. I feel very strongly.
Yeah, I do too. I'm still hoping the state will step up here and see the success that we have and follow that. I know there's efforts and
That's
steps.
why this is a
but-
bridge. We've got
Yes,
to keep
yes.
hitting the state
Yeah.
to do this very thing.
Yeah, and let us not speak of the feds, I guess. Commissioner White.
I don't care what the state does, this is our community, these are our kids, and we have a responsibility to our community members, and our kids are number one, more important than anything else in this county, in our families. I mean, it goes out from there on, so, absolutely. Tax dollars to help our community members is a money well spent.
And the reason I brought up the state is just because if they're covering it, then we don't need to tax our community members, but we do need to support them. So one way or another, but I'm just hopeful that the state does so then we can do other things instead, you know. We can't do it all, so
That's
we have
right,
to.
and we'll
yeah.
wait for the chicken to hatch before we start
Yes,
counting.
yes, exactly. Commissioner Hawkins.
But, so, you mentioned, I don't know where I wrote that one down now. The stabilization grants and $1.64, I think you said.
Yes.
I went on the DHS website yesterday, and in May, the legislature passed anywhere from $360 to $390 per FTE for July, August, and September, which it's all based on education, and I didn't understand the ones, twos, and threes of who gets 360, who gets 390 exactly. But that, if I just divide it by 40 hours a week, then, or whatever, it was basically $2 an hour, a little more. So the state did do something for July, August, and September, and then they are going to do something else in October, which sounded like it was continuing. That came off the DHS website. So are we saying that our $6 an hour subsidy, or enhancement, not subsidy, we're calling it an enhancement, is in addition to the state's $2 an hour? Or what I just heard you say, we want the state to step up. They did, not as much as we wanted. So are we saying we're going to do both, or reduce ours to $4 an hour instead of $6? I'm just curious what we're at with that.
Yeah. Nancy or Allison, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can comment that the current wage enhancement program for 2023 is on top of the COVID stabilization grants, which have ranged from $430 to $205 a month. Our analysis of the Great Start transition payments, which is that bridge, again, from the COVID stabilization to the Great Start compensation program, were estimated at $263 per FTE or $1.64 an hour. So slightly different from your analysis, Commissioner Hawkins. We can follow up and find out where that discrepancy is. But again, we're proposing that the enhancement pilot into 2024 will be on top of those Great Start transition payments, as providers have already been receiving the COVID stabilization grants in addition to the local child care wage enhancement program that our team administers. Effectively, if we were to include that, our estimates of the Great Start transition payments, that would be felt as a wage cut to our providers, and we don't want to further destabilize the progress that has been made over the last 6 months to increase the availability of childcare and bolster the childcare workforce locally.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Or it gives you more questions?
Yeah, I guess.
I could say one thing about the discrepancy. Those stabilization grants are designed to stabilize childcare in a number of different ways, the workforce being one of them. So only 70% of those funds need to go towards the wage increases, and the other 30% can be used for utilities, food costs, and other things that are needed to support childcare center operations.
That's helpful, thank you.
Thanks,
It
Emily.
ended up being about like $1.30 an hour to $1.60 an hour.
That's how it was different then. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
And I think it's just important to remember that, like Alison said, the state stepped up to replace federal funds. Those federal funds are what stabilization grants dollars were. So providers have been receiving those through COVID. So the state is just replacing federal funds that the providers had already received. So they didn't come up with new funds, basically, to give to providers. They're just continuing the federal program because the federal grant dollars ran out. And so ours is separate, like Alison said, from those state dollars. And we are grateful because they have continued it in their budget for the next couple of years. So we're grateful because that would have been very sad if they just got a $2 an hour pay cut. You know, because all of the costs just keep going up, in case you didn't notice. Yikes, every day I look at the gas number and think, yikes, you know, so all those went up, and so it'd be a big deal. You might not think it's a big deal, but $2 an hour is a big deal when you're trying to have such a tight bottom line.
Thank you. Any other questions about that item in particular, I guess? Or thoughts, or any other items from the budget we'd like to talk about? Get clarification or change direction or pivot or strategize or what have you? I'm not hearing or seeing anything. When do we think we're going to hear more about what might be happening in October? Probably not to October or something regarding the childcare. Or
That's
okay.
what DHS has told us.
Okay.
It'll be similar. As you probably understand way more than I do. So the legislator approved whatever, $11 million or whatever the amount was. And so they just have to figure out the formula to distribute that. They said that these transition grants, they think, are going to be similar to what the real Great Start compensation program will be. Very similar funds that they haven't come out with that magic formula yet as to how it's to be. And there might be, Commissioner Hawkins, what you saw on their site, because I feel like they put out some numbers like, we think it's going to be this, but don't count on it because we're still coming up with the official formula. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank
So
you.
they should have that, I think, next month, so that it rolls into October and providers don't have to be without those funds.
Alison and Plamen, do you feel like you have what you need as far as feedback from the board at this point to refine budget as more revenue comes in or what have you, more information comes along?
Yes, and as in previous years, we'll continue to keep this board informed as we receive those exact allocation amounts in the form of updated agenda items and budget summaries to this board through year end.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
I would just like to note, the board is scheduled to set the preliminary budget and levy on September 12th. That precedes the next meeting of the Public Health and Human Services Board. So if there are any additional questions or comments that staff would need to further refine the budget, we just need to have that to us before then, so that we can take that into account when we recommend the final or the preliminary budget and levy.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And I would highly encourage if there's some specific lines that we can ask staff to look at, it would be real helpful and otherwise we'll keep whittling away. Okay. Thank you, Plamen. Thank you, Alison, for presenting the preliminary or the proposed budget here and answering some of the questions that we've had. We can move on down to item 4 with the director's report, if we're ready there.
All right, and I will be as brief as possible, knowing that we're running short on time here. The first thing I'll mention is that we are very much looking forward to social worker Rachael Schauer moving into a key leadership position within our team effective October 3rd. Really grateful that we'll have just shy of 3 months for Rachael to mentor with Grace Bouchard, to go through some foundational child welfare training, to really develop some of those relationships locally and regionally that are so important to us being effective in this line of work. Just a little background on Rachael. She joined our team in May of 2022 as an adult services social worker. Prior to that, she worked at the Violence Prevention Center as a program advocate. And before moving to Cook County, Rachael worked with survivors and others experiencing homelessness at the YWCA, Cass Clay, and Moorhead. So Rachael has a really broad range of experience working with children and families. Really grateful for Rachael, for Plamen, for these leaders within our organization stepping up into these formal leadership roles on our team. It's very exciting. Included updated organizational chart in the meeting materials. We'll briefly summarize where we're at in filling vacant positions. We have 3 vacant positions currently. Anticipate filling the fiscal officer position this week. We did interviews last week and followed up with some scenario and accounting exercises via email. So expect to have a recommendation for hire either at the next regular board meeting or the next Public Health and Human Services board meeting. We continue to interview for the adult mental health and coordinated crisis response worker positions and anticipate posting for the vacancy that will be created with Rachael's transition to Children and Family Services. We have that posted internally right now, the adult and home and community-based services social worker. The monthly financial report included in your packet. I'll just mention a few areas that are over budget and provide a justification. Again, within the area of Children and Family Services, the FARS, or Family Response Program, and PSOP, Parent Support Outreach, are both over budget. Again, these are preventative services provided to children and families. Locally, we receive an allocation from the state to perform this work. We're slightly over that for year to date, but do not expect that to continue at the same rate through year end. Similarly, in the areas of mental health placements, over budget year to date due to adult mental health placements, and out-of-home placements, we are increased revenue as a result of unbudgeted revenue. This was a one-time payment related to the analysis of Title IV-E reimbursements. That's one of the federal reimbursements that we receive to offset the cost of care for youth who are in out-of-home placement. I want to recognize the Children and Family Services and Economic Assistance team. We recently received a report from the State Department of Human Services and the Human Services Performance Management Division, which is a unit of the State Department of the State Department of Human Services that has a focus on improving service delivery across mandated services in the state of Minnesota. Across all areas measured, Cook County either met or exceeded performance standards and statewide and regional performance trends for 2022. I'll just highlight a few areas, one being that Cook County leads the region in percent of days that children in family foster care are placed with a relative. So that's always one of our goals, is to place a youth with a relative when possible. And we were at 95.4% of days that youth in Cook County were in foster care, that those days were spent with a relative. And this is a significant improvement from 2020, where we were at less than 35%. So really remarkable improvement in that area. Within economic assistance, Cook County is also above the range of expected performance in the Self-Support Index. This is a measure of economic stability and security for families who are enrolled in the Minnesota Family Investment Program and the Diversionary Work Program, which again are economic and employment supports for families with children. So what this means is that children and families in Cook County that are receiving services from PHHS are safer, more secure, and more economically stable as measured by the State Department of Human Services. So kudos to everyone involved with that important work. Also included in the agenda materials was a lengthy summary from the Association of Minnesota Counties on the 2023 legislative session. I am not planning, nor am I prepared to provide an in-depth analysis of all of the different items that were passed in the last session and how that could impact our work. But if there are areas that you're particularly interested in, I'm happy to get feedback on that and be prepared at a future board meeting to go more in-depth with local context on how some of these changes that were approved in the 2023 session could impact our work, as well as what's on the horizon in terms of opportunities for advocacy and engagement going into 2024. The last big news that I want to share with you all since our last Public Health and Human Services Board meeting in July is that we are now a designated naloxone access point, and want to recognize the great work again of Andrea, our prevention coordinator, and all of the partners involved in that Rural Communities Opioid Response Grant Program and this board to allocating a portion of our opioid settlement dollars towards increasing access to naloxone. I think, yes, Kelsey and Karen are still here, and they're great partners in this work as well through Cook County Higher Ed in incorporating that naloxone training into the CPR first aid training. We have a large cohort of county staff going through that as well. Yesterday, I attended by Zoom the Human Services Leadership Forum. That's a group that I joined several years ago that includes State Department of Human Services, county commissioners, elected officials and program staff from tribal and county human services. And there was a representative from the State Department of Human Services and the new Office of Addiction and Recovery on both statewide and federal initiatives to address the opioid crisis. And one of the things that he mentioned as a federal strategy is naloxone saturation, just making sure that these life-saving supplies are available in as many places to as many people as possible to save lives. And I just felt so much pride for what we've done here in Cook County to increase access throughout Cook County and Grand Portage.
And I'd just like to second what Alison said, to thank Cook County Higher Education for what they're doing, because I had an opportunity to go through that training and get certified, and I will tell you that they presented it in a manner where even I get it, which is really wonderful, and I feel very comfortable going forward if I'm in a situation where I have to use that product to be able to do it. But Cook County Higher Education is bending over backwards to make sure just general people are able to take this training and be prepared, and I wanted to thank them for that.
Thank you. Commissioner White?
What was the name of that organization that you joined a few years ago?
It's the Human Services Leadership Forum. I'd be happy to share more information on that if you're interested.
Are you through with your report?
That's it.
Okay. Any questions for Alison? Comments? All right. Right on track here, right? This brings us down to item 5A, the request for the wage enhancement program through 2024. Anything you want to, we've talked a fair amount about it already. Does anyone want to talk more about it? Because I don't need to, but I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Sullivan.
I would like to move to approve the use of fund balance to continue the child care wage enhancement program through 2024.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Rana. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Commissioner Hines.
I have one question. So I get you are budgeting for 2 new providers. What if we have 4? What happens? Because I would hope there's more than 2 in the next year. Yeah. But what are you going to do?
Apply for more grants.
We're
always going to do that too.
That's why I didn't know, is this going to be first come, first served, and we hit that dollar amount? Okay. I'm just.
That's a good question.
I just
wondered. That's a very good question. And maybe you could help us understand how long it takes to get a childcare up and running.
That's a good question too. If you ask the people who know, like First Children's Finance or Child Care Aware, they'll say it'll be like 4 to 6 months. It is a process. We have to wait for background studies, and then, even though we go through everything, maybe I go and do all of my part, and I submit my recommendation for licensure, DHS has to approve it, that could take a while. I think that you could do it actually in probably like 2 months. If your facility didn't need any big changes or your home was set to go. I think in 2 or 3 months is very, very reasonable, even with background studies and those sort of checks for that.
But in Cook County?
I was just going to say.
Well, if there's a problem, it could take a long time. I mean, because we've had a provider who there was an issue, and so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and change some things and then resubmit. That happens. But another, as many of you may have heard, Birch Grove is considering being able to open infant and toddler care down in Luton, so we're down in Tofty, so we're working with that. Their facility won't need many modifications. They're already an existing program. They have a license for their preschool. So that is not going to take us very long to be able to license. Essentially, we're licensing a space. They've already had a license. So that could happen very quickly. In just a couple months, we should be able to get that through once it's all approved. And you get all of your stuff on site, and you're ready for an inspection. A child care center, a whole different story, because you need DHS to come out. So you're at the mercy of them sending a licenser. Or we may need a fire marshal inspection. We will at Birch Grove if we do that. So again, you're at the mercy of someone else coming in their schedule to do that. But I have a great relationship with our fire marshal inspector for our region, and he said he's happy. He loves child cares, wants them. Everyone needs them. He'd be happy to come up as soon as he possibly could fit it in to do any sort of inspection. So
I would add to the front end of this, so Nancy, the other thing that I work with is helping that childcare provider understand how to set up her business, his or her business, what they need to do to get the necessary qualifications in order to even get to the point where they're asking for this licensing. So if you're going to put that into the equation, I'd add the work I do with childcare providers is a couple of months before they even get to the point where they can go to Nancy's DHS and say, okay, I'm ready to now start all the work that Nancy was just saying. So I'd say 4 months. That's a really good thing.
It depends on the training, right? Because they need to have a certain amount of training.
Right.
You have some people who've done this before, they're good to go. Some people who are just starting from the beginning, it's going to take a little while
Right.
to get their training done and everything before they can submit that license. So again, there's a wide range. They'll say 4 to 6. If people, already have a background and we already have a license, then we might be able to do that in 2 or 3. But probably 4 to 6 is more reasonable for someone just starting out.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And so, to Commissioner Hawkins's question, you mentioned the Birch Grove potential, is that on top of what we're already
No,
planning?
that's on there.
Okay, yes, good. So, have you heard any questions about interested parties, any inklings, any feeler? Please, Commissioner Story.
Yes, we do have one interested lady who's perhaps going to head that up, but we're still waiting to hear the final decision.
Great, yeah. And sorry, yeah, thank you. And then, so are there additional inquiries, I guess, just to answer Commissioner Hawkins's, question and concern, just about if there's more interest, are we going to be able to do that? Have you heard more interest? Are we we've made this push and we've gotten some interest and things are moving. Are there other people still kind of walking on the fence or dipping their toe in the water or whatever you want to?
We've had 2 other people call and inquire.
Okay.
We wanted to gather information just in the very beginning stages.
Okay.
I would add that as a part of our deed grant, we also had funds, or have funds, we still have them, we're using them, to be able to do kind of like an outreach and public relations campaign that we're having a meeting with a PR firm, Giant Voices, actually on Wednesday. So if we throw out a bunch of social media stuff, throw out a bunch of things about how great it is to start a childcare business, could we have other people calling interested? We hope so. That's what those dollars are for.
Right.
We just wanted to, I guess when we were predicting it, we just kind of wanted to be conservative.
Sure.
Again, we don't want to
Yeah.
ask for a giant amount, that we don't need that, but my understanding is if we ask for it and we didn't need it, it just stays where it is.
Right.
It isn't like we really take it, but I could be wrong.
No, that's, if we're using the fund balance,
But no,
that's,
we only built in those 2, and they're just, that's what we built in.
well, yeah, and so Commissioner Hawkins, your question leads me to wonder, do we want to hope for others and put that into our potential fund balance use as well? Or should we just take things as they are now? I guess it's going to be fund balance use one way or another. It's just whether we budgeted for it or not. So maybe we don't need to change anything. Does that make sense?
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this piece of the conversation. This is great.
Good.
No,
we're here all day.
No.
I understand, and I'm okay with this dollar amount with the idea that I think we all hope we have lots more childcare spots, and if we need to do something halfway through the year, I'd appreciate coming back and giving us a report of why it's necessary. So, I just wanted to clarify that
Yeah,
It could happen.
what I was voting for, okay?
thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Great.
Wonderful question. All right, any other questions or comments? Hearing or seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That moves us down to 5B, and these are the public health grant recommendations. Any questions there? They're spelled out. They were in our presentation. We just approved the wage enhancement program, so there were two options presented, one with the wage enhancement, one without. Hopefully everyone can see that. Looking for either a motion or discussion or whatever the board chooses here. One question I had is just considering the requests, the level of requests, if in the budget it was enough for next year, but again, just balancing bang for buck, childcare being what I perceive as priority for return on investment. Also recognizing that these partners are extremely valuable in our community, but just that we can't do it all. So I respect the level where it's at and certainly the work of the committee reviewing everything here. Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, I had the privilege to observe the process, and I just want to thank everyone, particularly Grace, for leading the group through such a challenging task, but a really important task to our community. And I just want you to know I value all the work that the group does. It's very important. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve the Public Health Fund Review Subcommittee recommendation granting $150,000 for the 8 local organizations.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We have a motion. Is there support?
I'd like to second.
Thank you, Pat. Motion and support. Further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously there, too. Thank you. And moving down to item 5C, our Care Partners subcontract. Any questions there for anyone? Else I'll entertain a motion there.
Mr. Chair?
Please,
I'd like to
Commissioner.
make a motion to approve the subcontract with Care Partners for Age-Friendly Communities Grant.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. I have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Raina. Motion and support. Further discussion. Another incredibly important partner we have in our community, and can't thank them enough for the work that they provide. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously there. All right. Down to committee reports.
No.
Item 5D.
We added one.
Psych. Thank you.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I did too, clearly. This is previously 2E. This is the higher promotion of Rachael for our Children and Family Services Supervisor. So, Commissioner Hawkins, did you have a question you wanted to ask there?
Well, I just want to point out, I actually thought it was a typo when it says effective October 3rd. And I want to be extremely clear. I am not talking about people, I am talking about positions.
Okay.
I have concerns that we need a 3-month training period for a position. I think it sets a precedent across the whole organization that we somehow, it takes 3 months mentorship to learn how to do some jobs. I understand Grace has been there for 16 years, a lot of institutional knowledge that really are going to miss. Appreciate the work. But it's, to me, a red flag if we have turnover in any department, and it takes 3 months to train somebody to transfer that knowledge. It's institutional, we need to fix that issue. So when I first saw this, I thought it was supposed to say December 3rd. It says October 3rd. So that's, I just wanted to express, I don't agree that we should, if we are hiring somebody that maybe doesn't have all the skills we need, so we need to train that person, that's okay. But maybe there should be a training wage or some in-between process. And so I just needed to express my concern over that.
Thank you. So how long do you think that the overlap should be?
Before she answers that question, could I make a comment? I don't think we can say this is something that's going to set precedent. I think we have to look at each job. And when we're talking about public health and human services, and we're talking about federal, state, and local rules and regulations, since I've been chair of this Human Services Board, I cannot believe the rules and things that these people have to jump through in order to make their jobs happen. I think in this particular case, it's not institutional knowledge that Grace is going to be giving to Rachael. I think and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think what she's going to be giving her is each and every program that's working within that organization, how it's set up, who's responsible, making those introductions to the state and federal people, all of those kinds of things that even with just scheduling, it's going to take more than a month, in my opinion, because I'm trying to do that right now and set up an onboarding program with the new executive director of the EDA. And I have to tell you that I have, like 60 different people I want someone to take her to meet to understand the program. So I'd really rather look at these kinds of training periods as positional requirements, not just everything can happen in 30 days. Because I think, and you can maybe bolster all my whatever here, and my concern about, this is a big job she's taken on.
I would argue that for any position within our department, a minimum of 6 months, if not a year or 2 years, is required to reach competency in these positions. And it's not often that we have the benefit of overlap with an experienced worker and a new person coming on board into that role. So I think 3 months is reasonable and appropriate. I'm very grateful for Grace, for her willingness to give notice in advance so that we have this amount of overlap and that we had a pretty quick hiring process in filling the position. I would add too, as opposed to the expense of bringing someone back on as a contractor to do that additional training after they've already resigned, that an additional month or several weeks of overlap would be a cost savings to the county, as opposed to writing up a contract and negotiating a contract rate and all of the work involved in that.
We've done that before.
We have.
I agree that the 3 months is not usual for our organization, and I also agree that for the Children and Family Services Supervisor, it's one of the most critical, and we're talking about the children in the most need in our community, that it's a very difficult and complicated position, so I could see where additional time is needed. And yeah, that's a good point. We have not been so privileged to have that overlap. We've had a quick departure for Fiscal Supervisor. We've had other departures that have caused some large challenges with just getting everything on board and then having to go through that contract. Maybe not in your department necessarily, but other departments. I do recall that. It probably, yes, I understand the perceived precedent. There's no legal precedent, so it is a case by case basis. That's why it's coming for us for approval. I guess probably along those lines, there's budgetary considerations. Is that something that we want to talk about, or is that well worth and a savings, as you said, instead of doing that contracted position. It's not crickets.
I'll just say, that may have been a minor factor in my thinking. It's not the major issue for me. It's,
The complexity
is,
of it, or?
right,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking organizational wide.
Mhm.
I mean, this is not the only department that has, I mean, critical people.
Right,
And
no.
what does that mean for our organization going forward when we say it takes, we will be training for 3 months, but you get your full salary? I don't know. I'm just raising the question because it was something that when I saw it, it was like, that's unusual. What does this mean going forward?
Mr. Yogi, yeah.
Yeah, it is unusual, and it's unusual because it's typically the case that when somebody leaves the organization, there is no overlap, there's no opportunity to provide that kind of training. And so I'm also not concerned about this setting a precedent, because I can think of very few situations since I got here almost 3 years ago where we would have had the opportunity to do something like this. And to me, this is just money well spent to make sure that Rachael is appropriately trained before Grace leaves so that she's able to do the job. It is very complicated, and it does deal with a lot of rules and regulations. So I think this is a really wise recommendation.
I think that's why we're paid the big bucks, in order to take and look at each one of these individually.
Plamen, please.
I'm just looking at the numbers, and if it's helpful, through July, we're at 45% on our personnel cost in that department. So
Okay.
we are under where we could be.
Okay, that is helpful, thank you.
Yeah, good.
And I'm not sure, I hope you don't mind if it just made me think when you were talking to Mr. Huggins. For example, when I came on as the licenser, I started in November. I couldn't do any childcare licensing until I went through foundations training, which was February. So I was here doing other things in my job, getting ready. But there are rules that DHS puts out saying you must, and I know Rachael in particular has to go through this child welfare foundations training. It's 3 months of training. It starts the second week of September and doesn't finish until the end of November. And until she finishes that, there are a lot of functions she will not be able to do in her role. So even though she's hired in the role, if we don't, do all these different trainings and all of that the state requires us to do, they won't let us do what we're supposed to do for that. So, yeah, I was kind of astonished coming to work for the county how long these training things are, and those things are set by DHS that you have to do before you can do your job. So.
That's really helpful, thank you. I was just thinking how long when Brady leaves that we want to have open.
No, don't think
Let's not talk about
Oh, yeah,
that.
Brady doesn't leave, Brady doesn't
Say
leave.
that out loud.
I'll add too that this is one of the strategic objectives that our strategic planning committee is working on, is developing a more robust succession planning process for the county organization as a whole.
Yeah.
So it's lots of opportunities to.
I think it'll make our organization a lot more resilient and thereby our community. Very good question. Thank you for spurring that discussion. So, that's still hanging out there for a motion. Rana,
I'll
please.
move that we approve this.
All right, we have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously there as well. Okay. Per usual, I let the meeting go too long, and we're down to the committee reports with not a whole lot of time. We don't need.
Maybe ask who has one.
Yes. Would anyone like to share something with the group today? I would just share that I was at the CHB meeting yesterday in Duluth. Again, medical presentation is usually what I find the most interesting. There's still the sexually transmitted infection outbreak in Duluth and in our region. There have been no new cases, I believe, of HIV since March, but there have been a very dramatic increase in syphilis cases still. The presentation this time was focused on gonorrhea, chlamydia, and something else I can't remember, but they are bacterial infections that are STIs that can be treated. And so the discussion was, or the presentation was on the use of doxy as an antibiotic to treat those, and looking at a very discrete population that's at the highest risk, I'd say, and how effective that is. And it's extremely effective. However, it also builds resistance in the bacteria at a higher rate than you would want to recommend for public health. You'd be chasing the tail and losing. So it was just a really interesting, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion. It was kind of silence in the room, just wondering about, is this, and the doctor was just asking, he was spurring conversation, but it was pretty interesting. That's all I wanted to share with that. Anyone else want to share anything? Then we are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes.